Everybody, thank you very much for being here to our Great Lakes Biochar Network Spotlight webinar series. We have a very special guest today, Brandon Smith, who's joining us currently from Allied Soil Health, but previously was Northeast Region Team Leader and Acting Director for USDA NRCS's Soil Health Division, and has loads of other experience that he can share with you today.
Thank you.
But thanks for being here, and
No
Brandon, I'll
problem.
let you take
Thank
it
you.
from here.
Yep.
All right, thanks, Emily. All right, yeah, I will share a little bit about myself and get this going, and you can still see my
What
screen.
age are you, Brandon? Sorry, what age are you?
What age am I? I'm 52.
Yeah, you're looking great for it, man. You're looking really young.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, so 52. I've had 30 years of experience in working in agriculture, so yeah, happy to share what I know and take any other questions along the way. So I'll do a few intro slides, and then I'll shut my camera off just so I can concentrate and go through some other slides. And feel free to jump in and ask questions at any point in time. And I think Amanda has scheduled 15 minutes at the end too for questions. So let's see here. So yeah, like Emily said, I started my consulting company, Allied Soil Health, back in the fall of 2022 after I left the NRCS. Basically, my main focus right now is on using biochar to improve soil health. So over there on the right is me with Secretary of Ag Bill Sack and NRCS Chief Terry Cosby. Before I left, giving them presentations on how to focus on carbon to improve soil health. And it's really been a passion of mine for a long time. When I left in August, one of the first things I did was to write a regional conservation partnership program grant with the NRCS that happened to be funded this year. Or actually, it was last year that it was funded. $9.8 million proposal for using biochar in the Mississippi River Basin to manage nutrients. And so we've got that underway, and we've got a lot of interesting insights from that proposal and what we've been doing with that in a number of states. And then last year, I became a partner and the chief scientific officer in Ashwood Biochar. We right now are a distributor, but I'd say we're probably the largest distributor of a wood-based biochar. Most of our locations are in the southeast, but we are expanding. Here is just a photo of one of the gasification systems that is used at a timber company. And the timber is used, of course, for retail products, but the gasifier is used to help make like OSB or plywood, so the residues are actually used to create steam through the gasification process, and then the steam creates the plywood, and then the biochar here is the leftover product, and it's pretty nice stuff. Has 80 to 90% organic carbon. And so we've been distributing that around the country. And so here's an example of where our locations are in the southeast. I think the northernmost one is in Missouri right now. We're working on shipping a lot of stuff by rail because we have a lot of material. And the backdrop of this map is really what the NRCS has come up with in terms of what they call the dynamic soil properties response to biochar. So using a number of things like soil texture, slope, available water capacity, et cetera, they've come up with this interpretation that basically says this is where you can. Yes.
I don't know what that was, but the person in the waiting room.
Okay. That was something. So The darker areas here are where you would expect to see a yield response from the application of biochar. And so this map tends to be pretty useful for folks in terms of planning purposes. And you can see, Michigan has a fair amount of dark areas up here, as well as Wisconsin, Minnesota as well. And, those tend to be the sandier soils, not always, but they tend to be. Let's see. All right. And then we'll just go to this slide too. And I'm going to just shut my video off here for now. So on this slide too, of course, it corresponds to the previous slide that I showed, where you can expect to see good results. But here it more tells you where biochar application is needed. And this is another interpretation from the NRCS, basically saying these soils are really prone to organic matter depletion. So the more red the area is, the more prone those soils are to depletion. So with those two maps together, you can really target some soils and say, hey, these are prone to depletion, and this is where you expect that you'll get the best response. And so, yeah, I just wanted to share that with you as kind of interesting things that we use, let's see, as tools. And then I think most of us know, why it's important about carbon. To put carbon back in the soil because we've been losing it for a long time. If you look at this schematic or diagram here of, the loss in carbon since pre-cultivation or intensive cultivation, if you will, we've lost, anywhere from 40 to 50% of the carbon that was really initially in the soil. And if we were to continue doing what we're not doing now, we might be right here on this blue line. If we stopped encouraging folks to do no-till and keep more residue on the fields, we'd of course lose more. But ways that we can get gains back is by doing no-till plus cover crops, and then no-till plus other technologies. And in my mind, the other technologies really have to do with biochar in a way that we can actually increase this soil organic carbon to levels that they once were. And it's important to know that, this is going to be a longer term fix too, because biochar lasts in the soil from hundreds to thousands of years, maybe approximately 500 years is the average.
Give a shit. Work hard, hurt, rob, kill indiscriminately.
So getting to the 10 questions, I guess, that we were talking about is, this is kind of my thought process as I go through things. Number one is, what is the cropping system that you're working with? How you actually get biochar into the soil is going to be really dependent on that cropping system, right? Is it a large scale row cropping system? Those have their own challenges, especially in no-till systems. What about permanent or perennial systems such as pasture, hay, or range? They have different challenges from row crops, but ones that need to be overcome as well. Specialty crops, maybe some of these highly cultivated specialty crop and vegetable production fields, those may be easier to work with than the two above. But orchards and vineyards are their own animal as well and need to be dealt with in a different way. And then, of course, forest land. How do you actually get this biochar applied in forest land and rough terrain? That's certainly a unique situation as well. And then urban. There's a lot of stuff being done right now in urban situations, such as, there in Iowa, showing down here is, oops, second, there we go. Down here is, tree planting with biochar and, a lot of green roof technology with biochar and things like that. So knowing the cropping system and some of the challenges that are associated with the systems, I think are really important. And then you have to think about, what are your objectives, right? And there can be many objectives when it comes to biochar, but for me, I kind of narrow them down to, about 4 or 5. Certainly what piques a lot of farmers' interests is anything that has to do with water, whether it's water infiltration or water retention. They want to know more about the impact of biochar there. And we know that the incredible porosity of biochar is what really gives it strength and water holding capacity, as well as other things. And so, we can actually target specific soils with specific biochars to maybe have larger particle sizes where you need infiltration to be better, and finer particle sizes where you're looking at actual retention in the soil as an objective. Clearly, most of us that are interested in biochar are looking at sequestering carbon, but you have to think about it too. Sometimes you may not get all these desired benefits with biochar, except that you sequester carbon in the soil. So that alone enough for you to move forward and want to use it and want to apply it. Improving fertility. This is the second biggest one that farmers are really interested in, especially as it relates to nitrogen management. The ability of biochar to adsorb or hold on to ammonium and other forms of nitrogen to not only prevent volatilization, but to reduce leaching, I think is really a key thing that's actually, money saved for farmers. And so that's part of our RCPP grant in the Mississippi River Basin, is really looking at nitrogen management as it relates to biochar application. And then lastly, if you're a soil health nerd, you know that it's all about microbial activity in the soil that makes things happen. And so these all these pores in these homes that are homes to microbes that increase nutrient cycling and help hold on to the nutrients, help then increase more soil organic matter in the soil and soil organic carbon. That's a really key thing as well. So number 3, what you really got to think about is what's your dominant soil texture. So getting back to kind of what we said before and looking at the map, we know that the best response for biochar tends to be in the sandy soils. So it's over in this area of the soil texture pyramid that we tend to see the best response. There is some response with the silty soils, but much less when it comes to clays. However, we can look at this research that was done in Iowa, and this was done on a silty clay. So if we go back here, it was a silty clay here. What they found was after 6 years and 4 tons of biochar, 4.1 tons of biochar applied. After 6 years, they found really hardly any improvements. No improvements in yield, very little improvements in water holding capacity or all those other great things that we talked about. But what they did find is that when compared to the actual carbon applied from the biochar, so if the biochar was, say, 80% carbon, they applied around 3.2 tons per acre of carbon. They came back in 6 years and found that they actually had 6.3 tons per acre of carbon in the soil. And so the benefit there is kind of what I was talking about earlier, is you can get increases in soil carbon and not have all those other great things. And if that's what you're after, then that's great. It's a great carbon sequestration strategy. So yeah, just wanted to share that. Number 4, this is what I believe is probably one of the more important things, and what I keep learning is more important, is the particle size or the form of the biochar. So it's still the early days of biochar, where we all think about it as being just this bulk thing that maybe takes the shape of what went into the pyrolysis or gasification system. It goes in a particular particle size and comes out relatively the same particle size. Well, there's a lot of processing that goes on post pyrolysis, that we all need to be aware of, and I think that's where we get into the really advanced technical area or arena of biochar. Whether you're having, larger chips, medium, small granules, or even powders. For me, the most exciting things right now are actually the pellets and the prills, because I feel that this is really going to get the agricultural industry moving quite a bit faster, because it's going to match up the requirements that most farmers have for their machines, rather than trying to deal with just this bulk product. And I'll get into that a bit more. So here are some of Ashwood's pellets that we have. Range of sizes: 3 millimeter, 6 millimeter, 9 millimeter, and then large bioenergy pellets. So these are densified, so they're generally 5 to 6 times as dense as bulk biochar. And then we'll be blending these with different materials, whether it be urea or zeolite or other things to make an advanced or enhanced product for specific situations. We're also moving into prilling as well. So you can see here that prilling, it makes it look like a fertilizer prill. So in that way, it fits with all the fertilizer spreaders that are out there on a large scale, and really can just be added to fertilizer. I envision a day when nitrogen fertilizers, aren't combined with a biochar carbon source in one way or another, whether it's biochar coated urea, or else they're just mixed together in the bin as well. So I think that's really promising in the future. And then where'd that go? There it is. And then, yeah, this is just a quick video. So those are our pellets being made in Indiana as we speak. So we have the ability to make this a large scale thing that folks can really take advantage of here soon. And then the last thing as it relates to particle size distribution is the powders. Pretty interesting. The idea that these powders can be used for fertigation applications. And so you're delivering a small dose over a long time with your fertilizer or with your irrigation system, particularly in orchards and vineyards and vegetables where you have intensive irrigation set up already. And if you look at it, the science of the particle size is met here, really, and you can see that your mesh and your micron for your particular sprinklers is very well matched up to what some of these powders are. So see here, 99% of this particular powder is less than 120 microns, which would really be good for these particular types of situations, medium to high flow drip irrigation or even micro sprinklers. However, this doesn't come without a cost, right? So the cost to bring it down to this powder is substantial. So while it's great, I think this is probably the one point in the market where there needs to be, I guess I would say, more volume of this to bring the price down and make it a little more attainable for a lot of people to use this as a fertigation product. And then the big question that a lot of people have is, how is a biochar going to be charged or inoculated? So most current thought is that you need to mix the biochar with something for a while before you apply it to the field. The idea being that there's so many exchange sites in the biochar that you'd want to at least saturate them with some nutrients, some microbes, and definitely some water before you put it in the field because it acts like a sponge or a battery, and you want to make sure it's hydrated or charged before you get it into the field. Um, Typically, most of the folks are going with compost. Manure is frankly my favorite way to get it inoculated. So shown in these pictures here on the right, this was actually just um, this was 2 weeks ago. We stood out in the freezing cold at this dairy farm in a manure pit and mixed different ratios of biochar with the liquid dairy manure or the dairy manure slurry, trying to see what the best ratio was to make it stand up a bit better, if you will. And I think this is really important for a number of reasons. I mentioned before that biochar has a really good ability to absorb ammonium, and these producers in particular, they've converted to no-till. But as you know, one of the problems with no-till and manure systems is that if you don't incorporate the manure, you lose the majority of the inorganic fraction of nitrogen in the manure to volatilization within about 24 hours. So historically, most farmers always had to, incorporate. They would spread manure and follow it with a disc and get it in the soil. So they kept that, 40% of the total nitrogen contribution in the soil. But if we have the opportunity now to mix biochar with the manure and retain that ammonium in these no-till systems, then it makes the system that much stronger, in my opinion. And of course, there are the environmental benefits too. So a lot with manure. Over here, people keep considering, well, how do you mix it with compost? How do you mix it with manure? When it comes to compost, obviously the best way is to use windrows, but not everybody can do that. So, there's things like TMR, total mixed ration mixers that, you can mix it together in here as long as it's dry enough and isn't going to cake, and you can have a pretty nice mixed product there. There's also microbial blends that a lot of people use. I don't have much experience with that, but using compost teas or so-called native microbial blends seem to work a lot. And other folks just want to charge it with manure, just to charge it with fertilizer, just to make sure that there's plenty of nutrients in the biochar. And then lastly, you don't have to charge it. There's plenty of evidence out there that even applying raw biochar is not detrimental to the soil. So just keep that in mind as well. Some questions to ask when you do this is, how moist is the biochar going to be when you're applying it and when you're mixing it? Those things certainly come into a play.
You reshare your screen, Brandon?
Oh, I feel like I am. Yeah, sure. Oh, I see what's happened. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. But where we're at right now, especially on larger scale right now, is doing field inoculation. So rather than inoculating the biochar, out on a hard pack or something like that, we're actually just putting it in the field with manure or compost a couple weeks before we actually plant the crop, so that we ensure that there's adequate rainfall, and the rainfall is needed then to move those nutrients and moisten the biochar before it gets lightly incorporated. And speaking of incorporation, then that's the question, how do you incorporate it? You want it near the root zones, obviously. One of the advantages with things like pellets and prills, though, and the powders, is because they've been ground down to different particle sizes. Little incorporation is needed for those because they will break down and just go into the soil by mass flow with rain flow. But a lot of folks are still do conventional tillage for that, whether it's inversion tillage or what have you, rototilling, things like that. Light disc or vertical till is probably one of the most non-intrusive ways to do it. shown up here on the right is one of our RCPP participants, Troy Feichter, last fall using his vertical tillage machine to get it into the ground. You can see it did leave quite a bit of dust, but it got it in, 2 to 3 inches into the soil and didn't do really much damage to the soil structure. In perennial systems, there's airway or a drag harrow. So airway here, drag harrow here. So you can scuff up the soil surface, right? Kind of open it up, get that biochar then applied, and do something like an overseeding of a legume like clover, and you'd have a beautiful system all set up there. Fertigation we talked about for sure. The California almond producers are really interested in fertigating. I think maybe a lot of the specialty crop producers will start to be interested in that as well. And then there's no-till options as well, depending who you are and what your system is. No-till drill is a great way to get it into pastures and no-till planters, et cetera, to get it into no-till fields. And then no-till fertilizer applicators for no-till fields. And then thinking about it being incorporated, one of the things is, oftentimes when you're reestablishing a hay field or something like that, it involves tillage during that reestablishment period or the renovation period, or obviously do it when you're planting a new orchard or renovating your orchard as well. Those are some common sense things. How frequently will the biochar be applied? So with our grant that we're working on right now, this is one of the interesting things that we give the choice to the farmer. So we basically say, over time, we want 3 dry tons per acre of biochar, an equivalent amount of either manure or compost applied to your fields. You can do 1 ton per year for 3 years in a row, 1.5 ton over 2 years, or 1 ton a year over 3 years. 1 ton every year for 3 years, or all of it, all 3 tons at once. So, and those have advantages and disadvantages. Some people like to do it one time, get it out of the way, get it done. There may be higher risk with that. If you do that, there's probably less disturbance to the soil. But if something goes wrong, that's probably where you'll see it if you do a one-time higher rate application. On a larger scale, lower rates spread out over a few years tends to make a lot of sense. It lowers your risk and is a slow gain in carbon over time and tends to be easier to manage with your other existing activities that you do on the farm. And then, of course, fertigation, always giving some small, frequent doses. That makes a lot of sense as well. And then, probably D is where a lot of people are, is they're, just unsure. They want to try a field and see what happens and do some monitoring and then figure out what they're going to do down the road. I think, for me, this, my recommendation is really kind of doing lower rates spread out over a few years. And there's nothing magical about 3 dry tons per acre. That's just kind of what we came up as a recommendation in NRCS when I was working there as a way to, really get a jump start on organic matter improvements. But there's nothing to say that, 5 tons per acre is bad as well. It's where economics come into play. All right, number 8. When will the biochar be applied? Also a common thing that we're working on in this grant right now, because each cropping system and each farmer tends to be very different, and what they plan to do with respect to tillage, incorporation, and their plants. The most common thing that we're actually moving toward is having the biochar be applied after harvest in the fall with a cover crop. In an ideal world, it gets planted with a legume cover crop because of the increase in nodulation that you see from biochar application. Doesn't have to be though. But the rationale behind doing this is you then give that biochar an entire winter and lots of moisture to equilibrate in the soil. And then in the spring, you're ready to go. The second most common thing I think that we're doing now is doing it in the spring, applying it at least 2 weeks before planting, but doing it before soybeans. So everybody, for better or for worse, everybody is worried about nitrogen tie-up with biochar. Now, it may or may not be true, and it's likely that it's less true than people think it is because the carbon from the biochar is very stable and does not mineralize like other labile or easily accessible forms of carbon in the soil. So that nitrogen tie-up probably is a overblown issue. However, to get in front of those concerns, we've really been encouraging the larger scale farmers to do it before their soybeans. And that seems to have taken hold with a lot of them. And again, looking down on the bottom right, if you're getting a 25% increase in nodulation, why wouldn't you do it before your soybeans as well? Now you could do it mid-season, like at side dress time, but you got to figure out a way to get it into the soil enough. So that's probably a more complicated one. After cutting the hay, for sure, that makes a lot of sense. And then maybe if you could get a no-till drill and drill in the biochar after cutting the hay, for sure. After livestock graze a paddock, probably not before, probably after. So there's there's manure patties in there. You can go in and spread biochar, and then you can use a drag harrow and get it all mixed up with the manure. That would probably be an ideal situation to apply as well. The comical one is once my NRCS contract is finalized, soil carbon amendment practice has been around since 2019. I developed it back then. It's had its fair share of government hiccups over the years. This year is really the first year where it's taken off, like hundreds of thousands of acres of people are taking advantage of it. Or people with hundreds of thousands of acres have taken advantage of it. So that's a pretty good thing. And then lastly is when spreading equipment is available, because not everyone has the equipment that they need to do this, because a lot of the equipment that you use is going to be dependent on what your inoculant or your charging source is and how you think you can get it spread. You just may not have it. You may have to borrow it. I guess that's a segue into another slide, but I just wanted to bring up this meta-analysis that was done, something I show a lot, and it's a review of 26 meta-analyses. So it's a really gross picture of some of the benefits of biochar. But one of the take-home messages for me in terms of getting biochar in between beans or in front of a legume is this 25%, plus or minus increase in the number of root nodules. And really what biochar is doing for root length, a 50% increase in root length. I mean, it's all about roots if you want to talk about, what's going to get you yield, what's going to get you better nutrient uptake, what's going to help you mine for water in different layers of the soil, at different depths of the soil. Root length is really I guess I would say an understated valuable asset. So I think that's really key, along with the root biomass. Really just good things as it relates to roots. And then the only other thing to show here, which I find very interesting, is there's a nice drop in nitrate leaching here. Averaging 12% reduction in nitrate leaching, and then there's a corresponding around 11% increase in nitrogen uptake. And so that's where, some of those yield responses are coming in addition to the plant available soil, water, and water use efficiency. I got to see this exhibit in DC, so, given no constraints in the soil, roots can grow, pretty deep, deeper than you'd really expect. And so, there's actually an advanced research project from the Department of Energy. It was one like ARPA-E, and this research project was to try and breed plants that had double the root length, so that they could, number one, store more carbon in the soil from the decaying roots, but number two, increase productivity in general because of what the roots are doing to, free up and take up nutrients, as well as host soil microorganisms, which in turn turn into soil organic matter. And so, if you can get a doubling of root length or tripling the root length, I think that's a fantastic thing. Okay, number 9, is there access to equipment? So this is also something that we're running up against. We're working with a lot of bigger farmers right now, and it's not necessarily scale specific what I'm talking about. It's all sorts of situations, but do you have the equipment to spread biochar in bulk form? Or does it have to be pelletized or prilled? And if it's in bulk form and you inoculate it or charge it with manure or compost, do you have the equipment to actually get that applied to your land? And so, some of the questions out there are, yeah, we've got the equipment. We apply manure already, and we're going to inoculate our biochar with manure. Okay, done deal. You've got the existing farm equipment. Some folks have gone down the road of wanting to purchase equipment for the application of biochar, and my recommendation is probably not. It's not going to be a continual thing that you do over time. If you want to be a hub for people and have a spreader, which this guy Troy Feichter that I mentioned, he actually provides it as a service now. So yeah, he has one, and he makes sure that other people are getting the benefit of his spreader. That's probably the situation where you'd want to purchase one, but otherwise probably not. Rent from a co-op is definitely a great idea, or even just a farm machinery sales outlet where they have rentals, or a conservation district. Some conservation districts actually have rental programs set up. Even if they don't, I'd get in touch with the conservation district staff in general, because they'll probably have a good idea. Tell them what you want, and they know people, and they can probably make some connections for you and figure out who's got some equipment and how you can get a hold of it and how you can get the job done. So definitely use them as a resource. I think they're generally underutilized. And there's a district in pretty much every county. Obviously, a custom applicator is great if they have the time. Getting someone that knows what they're doing to get out there and get it done quickly, give you in-depth measurements of how much was applied over what particular acreage. That is great if you can do that. And then also think about, just borrowing something from a farmer down the road. If they have a manure spreader, when they're not using it, maybe grab their spreader and use it on your own. And then number 10, the big one. So what type of application equipment is going to be needed? And that's a big question, because there's so many things out there, right? I won't read all of these, but there's spreaders for lime, for poultry litter, liquid manure, whether you apply it on the surface or inject it, all sorts of manure spreaders, specifically compost spreaders, drop spreaders, multi-spreaders, pendulum or cyclone spreaders, and then the alternate things like a no-till seed drill. Heck, you could use a helicopter. We had one person in Oklahoma that wanted to get biochar out on his rangeland, and there's no access to you couldn't drive there. So doing some helicopter spreading of biochar, of course it's surface applied, but those soils out there, have less than 0.5% organic matter. So getting anything out there on the soil would be beneficial. We talked about fertigation, and then of course the easy thing is hand tools. It all depends on scale. So here's our friend Troy again last fall in Indiana, loading up his spreader and getting it spread out. So here he applied 3 tons of biochar and 3 tons of compost to about 100 acres. And so, we debated this. We said, well, should we mix it first? And, commonly it said, yes, you want to mix it first. But Troy and I kind of came to the decision that I think we should just spread it separately and get a better spread pattern. So he went out and he spread the biochar first, and then he spread the compost on top. And the biochar was about 50% moisture, so it's not going to blow away like most people think. If biochar is less than 15% moisture, you'll probably have some wind erosion. But if it's like 20 or 30% or higher, it's going to stick on the ground, especially if there's stubble there. So that's what Troy did. He made 2 passes on the field. He felt that even though that was, extra fuel, he felt that it was a better way to get a more consistent spread of both products. And there's all sorts of spreaders out there that you can consider for sure. The lime and fertilizer spreaders where you actually, it's basically just a belt conveyance system that comes down to spinners, and the spinners just spin it off in both directions. So depending on the density of the product, depends on how far that it'll go. So if you have really light, fluffy stuff, it's not going to go too far. So that's a consideration as well. A lot of the spreaders, normally would shoot a, 80-foot width, but I think Troy was at a 40-foot width, considering the density of the product he was working with last year. Wood ash spreaders have been around for a long time. So I live in Maine, and up here in the Northeast, farmers have been using wood ash for years and years and years. And so these are just a really common way to get this out, similar to what I was showing before. My favorite way, of course, is to mix with manure. And so even if you've got a splash plate here and you've got a slurry coming out of the back onto a splash plate, if this is mixed with some biochar, that's really going to hold those nutrients, particularly nitrogen, in the soil. And I think it's an easy way to get it applied. And I just want to add a note here. The common ratio that we were talking about for biochar to liquid manure is roughly 10% by volume. And we got a lot of, negative feedback, rightly so, from dairy farmers in particular, saying, well, we just don't have room in our manure pit to put 10% by volume of anything in there. Our manure pits are usually full. And, on some of those experiments that we did, and if you think about the porosity of the biochar, it actually doesn't add 10% by volume. Think about putting a sponge in a glass of water, and the sponge isn't adding volume because the sponge is taking up all that water into its pores. And that's really what's happening. You're not seeing a huge volume increase, if any at all, because it's all getting sucked into the pores in the biochar. So that's a good kind of take-home message. Obviously, the ideal situation, though, is to inject it and get it into the ground with manure injection systems. These are starting to become more and more popular, whether it's a complete unit like this or other strategies with drag hoses and frac tanks. Nevertheless, getting the manure and the biochar into the ground at the same time is key. And then there's the classic manure spreaders, which, I think this is, if there's a go-to option for you, go to this one, there's end discharge ones, and they're all around the place. So, if I had to, I'd mix manure with biochar or compost with biochar and just use a manure spreader, period. Just because of their availability. So there's end discharge, and then of course there's side discharge. And side discharge, yeah, you get quite a lot of it thrown out there. And spread pattern may not be ideal, but nevertheless, it's also a good alternative to get it all kind of mixed up and sent out of the side. There are specific compost spreaders made for thicker material like compost. Some are called mulch spreaders, but definitely Mill Creek is one of the leaders in compost spreaders. So you can look into those if they have small scale ones, and then they have larger scale ones as too. But these work as effectively as manure spreaders. They probably work just a little bit better with compost and getting a more even spread pattern. No-till drill is probably, one of my favorite ways to get biochar biochar pellets or prills into the soil. Because it just gets it right into the root zone there, little disturbance, very few problems. There are a fair amount of these drills around. Just want to make sure the pellet or the prill is tough enough so that it doesn't break up and bridge as it goes through the drill. If you look here, this is just how no-till planters and drills work. Here's a planter up here. And basically, this is what's called a residue management. Just kind of cuts some of the residue if it's there. And then this coulter slices into the soil. And then this disc opener opens up a slot. And then you get your product dropped down into the slot. This is a gauge wheel, and make sure it goes at the right slot. And well, this is for seeds, but that's a seed firmer just to make sure it has good seed soil contact. And then the slot that you make gets closed by these closing wheels. And so that's a planter, and that's the same thing with the drill here. So, you probably don't need the seed firmer for sure, but getting the slot open with your coulter, and then or started to get open with your coulter, then completely open with your disc opener, and then having your material come down, drop in this double disc opener area here, and then have these press wheels behind you closing the slot. It's a great way to trap that carbon into the soil. And these are the Mill Creek spreaders again, which are they're around. When I was at the University of Tennessee, we bought one of these for the organic farm. They have versatility in their favor. So they can do all sorts of, whether it's dual discharge spreading, whether you can drop spread behind it, do some side spreading, or even shoot it at a distance. These do pretty well in orchard and vineyard situations. You're treating it as a mulch, but you don't have that much, or you don't have many other options than to treat it as a mulch. And it's okay. I mean, the biochar will migrate into the soil over time. Think about earthworm activity, and think about just particle size and movement. So I think this is still a good way to deal with biochar and perennial systems. And I ran across this as well. This is called a multi-spreader. I just kind of liked their slogan here, with their widespread beater, neither moisture content nor particle size, as long as it fits through the end gate, is a problem. So if you're really not sure what you want, one of these multi-spreaders might be a good idea. Certainly this one being used in vineyards, and this one being used in more perennial systems. But but this could be a small option for a conservation district or something like that to help some farmers get going in terms of spreading farmers or urban farmers or small scale growers, you name it. And then going to large scale, here's the idea that, you actually get some of those pellets and prills and you get them actually injected into the soil. So stored into, a large fertilizer storage tank, and then actually, like we showed before with the no-till drill, you're just making a bit of a notch in the soil or a slot in the soil, and then you're dropping in the material through these hoses into the notch, and then the basket is closing up the slot that you made afterwards. So there's a lot of these big things out there that can be used. There's a lot of creativity that's needed there. But again, filling one of these up with a whole bunch of biochar prills and setting them down, it may take an extra pass. So what do you want to do? Do you want to put your fertilizer in one and biochar in another, have them mixed and sent in? And if you are doing that in that situation, then, you'll be in that camp of applying just a little bit of biochar over longer periods of time. And then lastly, on the small scale, you can use these earthways too as well. You see this guy kind of modified his to pull this small spreader similar to this one. You could do that, I think, and that's fine. I don't know how that beats hand tools, to be honest, but maybe he thinks it does. But I guess there's a lot of creativity in terms of how you can get it out there on the ground. So anyways, just a parting shot here. This was 400 tons delivered to Indiana. This was Troy Feichter's farm in this fall. Definitely had to use end dump trailers. They mucked up his field quite a bit, so we had some learning experiences there as well. But I think through this grant in particular, we're making a lot of progress, and our knowledge level of practical application of biochar on a larger scale is really increasing exponentially. So with that, I'll say thank you and take any questions at this point in time.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that, Brandon. That was very informative. Everyone, thank you for bearing with us as we work through those interruptions. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we can call on you. Oh, someone said, can you please show slide number 1 again? They were a little bit late.
So, slide number 1 or the first question to ask?
Good question. Oh, point number 1. I think it was just yeah.
Cropping system. Yeah. Basically was just saying this is really going to dictate how you strategize everything. And I think that's common sense, but each one has their own limitation and things that need to be worked around in order to get a successful application.
Okay, and from John Carter, I have are carbon credits a part of your service?
I wish, John, if you have any up-to-date information, I'd be glad to discuss it. We started about a year ago working on combining carbon credits with this, and it got really murky, especially with biochar. and the idea that biochar manufacturers are getting carbon dioxide removal credits and they don't want any double counting. And we kind of took a back seat for right now and are waiting for the industry to kind of figure that out before we move forward.
This is John Carter.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
336, are you familiar with that? I think that is what is being rolled out for us here in Michigan. Is that part of the situation with you, is trying to figure out how those are, whether it's you as the manufacturer of the biochar, or is it the farmer that's incorporating it into the first either in soil or into manure or whatever? Are you familiar with any of that?
Yeah, so I wrote 336
Okay.
when I was with the NRCS. So that's my baby, if you will.
Okay.
So we work with farmers. So I'm a technical service provider right now for the NRCS, and I write plans for 336. And then, of course, I'd like my company's biochar to be used, but it's not always the case. I'm just, local is always better. So that's kind of where I work. But still nothing touching carbon credits per se with 336.
Okay. Okay. So I guess I'm trying to figure out how that whole revenue stream could become available. And there's a lot of it related to measurements beforehand and afterwards, and determining what it was before and after, and a percentage of how would you speak to that, if there's any advice on your part if somebody wants to see if they can capture some of that income?
Yeah, agreed. I would do soil organic carbon measurements based on zones in your property prior to any application, and then 3 to 5 years after, I would follow up with the same soil organic carbon measurements in the same areas that you measured before.
So are you saying you'd have to wait 3 to 5 years before you'd maybe get approval for 336 payments?
Oh, goodness, no. Okay, I missed what you were asking. No, so for 336, no, you should be able to go in and apply and have a contract and be able to apply biochar the next season.
Okay.
That's available after you get your contract. 336 will ask you to take specific soil measurements, which, soil carbon's one of them.
Mhm.
But that's not going to get in the way of you getting a contract at all.
Got it. Okay. And in forested areas, any recommendations on other than helicopter applications? What'd be your recommendation for quite hilly forest areas?
Yeah, I almost defer to Emily on that, because we've been toying around with it, but I'm an agricultural specialist, and I don't know if Emily's still on, actually.
Yeah, sorry, Emily had to hop off, but
Okay.
That's okay. I can check with her later on. It's not a problem. So see what we can do. Okay. Well, excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
and I have a comment from Layla saying, thank you for your presentation. It was very clear. I don't have any more questions in the chat. Does anyone have anything else before we wrap up?
Would you like me to share the presentation with you, Amanda?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're also going to be sharing this recording on our social media and our YouTube.
The sharing, Brandon, is that with the AI assisted where you're putting out the basically the transcript of it, or are you just the recording of it, video and transcript?
I think Amanda's going to share the video and I'll share my PowerPoint.
Perfect. Great. Okay. Appreciate
No
that.
AI.
No AI. Yeah. It actually works quite well. I've used it one time and I found out surprisingly accurate. So that might be a feature to consider in the future on something like this. If you have everybody's email, which you do, it could be easily transcripts sent to everybody. So a thought. Thank you.
Makes sense. All right. Well,
All
thanks. Thanks, Amanda, for inviting me. And thanks for showing up, folks. And,
Yes, thank you to everybody for your time today, and a big thank you to Brandon for this wonderful presentation. And we'll be following up soon with a post-webinar survey, just asking a couple questions.
Right.
So, all right. Everyone enjoy your Tuesday.
Bye.
Bye.